She joined the military with a burning dream. From the moment she was old enough to understand what soldiers did, she wanted to wear the uniform. She wanted to carry the flag on her shoulder. She wanted to prove to herself and to the world that she was strong enough, but the dream was harder than she imagined. When she arrived at the training camp, she was full of energy. Her heart raced as she looked at the other recruits. Some were tall, some were muscular, some carried themselves with confidence. She stood among them with her back straight, trying to look brave. Even though her hands trembled, the first day began with running drills. The recruits lined up at dawn. The air was still dark, but the sound of boots echoed across the ground. The instructor blew his whistle, and the group took off like a pack of wolves. Dust rose into the air as heavy feet pounded the dirt. At first, she ran hard. She pushed her legs forward, her breath loud in her chest. But soon, her body betrayed. Her legs grew heavy, her lungs burned, and the others began to pass her one by one. The leader shouted faster, "Push yourself!" But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't keep up. By the time the others reached the finish line, she was far behind, struggling to breathe. Her vision blurred with sweat. It was only the first test, and she had already failed. The whispers began. Other recruits smirked. Some shook their heads. "She won't last a week," one muttered. Another laughed. "She should have stayed home." Her face burned with shame. She wanted to answer back, but her voice felt trapped in her throat. The next day brought the rope climb. A tall wooden pole stood before them, with a heavy rope dangling from the top. Each recruit had to climb quickly and ring the bell at the top. One by one, they went up. Some fast, some slow, but most managed to ring the bell. When her turn came, she grabbed the rope with determination. "I can do this," she whispered to herself. Her hands gripped tight, her feet pressed against the rope, and she pulled herself upward. But halfway up, her arms started to shake. Her grip slipped. Sweat poured down her palms. Her muscles screamed in pain. The bell looked so close, but her body refused to move. And then it happened. Her hands lost hold. She crashed to the ground with a loud thud. Dust rose around her. As she lay on her back, staring at the sky in defeat, the laughter grew louder this time. "Pathetic," one recruit shouted. The instructor's face twisted in anger. "You call that effort?" he barked. Her dream felt like it was breaking, piece by piece. Still, she didn't give up. She woke early every morning, practicing quietly, running when others rested, trying to build her strength. But no matter what she did, the tests kept breaking her spirit. During shooting practice, her aim shook. Her bullets missed the target again and again, while others hit with precision. During push-ups, her arms gave out after only a few tries, while others pushed the ground like machines. It felt like the military wanted to crush her, to remind her she didn't belong. At night, she sat on her bunk, staring at her hands. Her knuckles were bruised, her skin torn, her muscles aching. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall where others could see. She told herself, "You came here for a reason. You came here to prove something." But inside, a storm was growing. Doubt whispered louder than her own voice. Maybe they're right. Maybe I'm not strong enough. Maybe I don't belong here. Still, the next morning, she stood in line again. Her uniform dirty, her body weak, but her eyes still holding a small flame. The instructors didn't see that flame. They only saw failure. From day one, every test seemed impossible. She failed again. The running test had left her last in line. The rope climb had dropped her flat on the ground. Now came the marksmanship drill. The recruits were given rifles, their hands firm on the weapons. Targets stood far away, white boards with red circles in the center. The instructor barked, "Soldiers, hit targets. If you miss, you are useless. Remember, every shot counts." One by one, the recruits stepped forward. The first hit close to the middle. The second was even better. Shots rang through the air, the smell of gunpowder filling the field. When it was her turn, she swallowed hard. She had practiced at night, whispering to herself that she would not fail again. She raised the rifle, tried to steady her trembling hands, and pulled the trigger. Bang! The The bullet flew, but it missed the target completely. Whispers started behind her. She ignored them and fired again. This time, the bullet landed on the board, but far from the circle. Her hands began to shake more. Sweat rolled down her face. She fired again, and again, missing almost every time. The instructor slammed his cap on the ground. "Hopeless," he roared. "At this rate, the enemy won't even need to fire. You'll defeat yourself." The laughter of the recruits echoed. Some shook their heads. One of them leaned to another and whispered loudly, "She's a joke." Her face turned red. She lowered the rifle, ashamed. The day wasn't over yet. Next came the push-up test. "Down, up, down, up," the sergeant shouted. The ground shook with the rhythm of dozens of strong bodies. Arms pumped like machines, sweat poured, but the recruits kept moving. She started strong, lowering her chest to the dirt, pushing herself back up. But soon her arms trembled. Her elbows bent weakly. Her chest barely touched the ground. By the time the others had crossed 50, she collapsed. At 12, the sergeant stared at her as if she had committed a crime. 12? Only 12? This is not a playground. The recruits burst into laughter. Some mimicked her weak push-ups, their voices cruel and mocking. She lay on the ground, her face pressed against the dirt, biting her lip to hold back tears. The next drill was worse. The obstacle course stretched across the training field, a line of walls, crawling nets, mud pits, and heavy logs. It was the true test of endurance. Only the strong finish this course, the sergeant shouted. The recruits cheered and ran forward. Some climbed fast, others crawled through mud like warriors. When her turn came, she sprinted toward the first wall. Her body slammed against the wood as she tried to pull herself up. Her nails dug in, her arms shook, but she couldn't lift herself over. The wall stood tall, mocking her every effort. She tried again. Her knee scraped against the wood. Her hand slipped, and she fell back. The recruits ahead didn't even notice her anymore. They were too busy finishing the course, their voices full of pride. She stood there, breathing hard, staring at the wall as if it were laughing at her. Behind her, a group of recruits whispered, "She's done for." Another voice added, "I don't even know why they accepted her." Her chest tightened. For a moment, she thought of walking away. The thought of leaving everything behind crossed her mind. But she didn't move. She just stood there, staring. At the wall, anger and shame mixing inside her heart. That night, back in the barracks, she sat on her bunk, her hands trembling. Her body was covered in bruises. Her knees ached. Her arms felt like stone. Around her, the other recruits laughed, trading stories of their victories. Bragging about their strength, she stayed silent, staring at the floor. A soft voice broke the silence. It came from the bunk beside her. "You're not weak," whispered a fellow recruit. She turned her head. A young man with kind eyes looked at her. He wasn't mocking her. He wasn't laughing. He was serious. "You're fighting too hard against yourself," he said. "That's why you keep failing." She frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" Didn't explain. He only gave her a small smile and said, "You'll understand soon." Those words stayed with her as she lay in bed. She stared at the ceiling, listening to the snores of the others, feeling her heart pound, fighting against myself, she thought. What does that mean? The night was long, and sleep refused to come. By morning, she was more tired than ever. Her eyes were heavy, her body weak. But she stood in line again. The sergeant barked orders. The recruits began another set of brutal drills. And once again, she failed. No matter what she did, no matter how hard she pushed, she kept falling. Behind, the whispers grew louder, the laughter sharper. And her dream of proving herself seemed to fade further away. But in the distance, someone else had started watching her. A man in a different uniform. A uniform that carried power, a Navy SEAL commander. He didn't laugh, he didn't shout, he didn't mock. He only watched, and his eyes never left her. Failure had become her shadow. No matter how hard she pushed, the tests always ended the same. Weighed with her body on the ground and laughter ringing in her ears, The other recruits didn't see her as one of them anymore. They saw her as a burden, a joke. Whispers followed her wherever she went. She's not cut out for this. Should go home. She's wasting everyone's time. At first she tried to block the voices out. She told herself they didn't matter. But words cut deeper than wounds. Each laugh, each cruel comment chipped away at her spirit. One morning during breakfast, she sat alone at the corner of the dining hall. Her tray was untouched, her hands wrapped tightly around her cup of water. A group of recruits nearby spoke loudly enough for her to hear. "Did you see her yesterday? Couldn't even finish half the course?" "Yeah," another added, smirking. "I thought she was going to cry." The table burst into laughter. Her jaw clenched. She kept her eyes on the floor, refusing to look at them. But her chest burned with humiliation. She wanted to scream. She wanted to prove them wrong. But her body refused to listen. Every time she tried harder, she failed harder. The sergeants noticed too. They stopped yelling at her. They didn't even waste their anger anymore. They looked at her with something worse than rage disappointment, as if she didn't even deserve their voice. It was worse than being shouted at that night. Lying in her bunk, she stared at the ceiling. The words of the kind recruit still echoed in her head. "You're fighting against yourself." What did that mean? She thought about it again and again. She remembered the way she tightened up before every test, the way her heart raced faster. Then her legs, the way her fear of failure felt heavier than her backpack. Maybe she really was fighting herself. But how could she stop? The next day brought another set of drills, crawling under barbed wire while bullets fired overhead. The dirt was sharp, the ground uneven. Recruits dropped to their stomachs and began crawling like wild animals. She dropped too. The ground tore at her elbows and knees as she pushed forward. Dust filled her mouth. Her heart raced as the sound of gunfire cracked above. She tried to move fast, but panic overtook her. Her breath came in gasps. Her arms gave out. She froze in the dirt while the others sped past her. The instructor blew his whistle, furious. "Move, or get out of my field." She couldn't. Her body refused to listen. She pressed her face into the dirt, her chest heaving, tears burning her eyes. By the time she crawled out, she was the last again. Mud covered her face, her uniform ripped, her spirit crushed. The recruits stood watching. None of them said a word this time. Their silence was heavier than their laughter. She walked past them with her head low, her boots dragging. It felt like the world was closing in on her. That evening, when training ended, she didn't go to the mess hall. She went to the far corner of the field, where the sun dipped low and the sky burned orange. She sat alone, hugging her knees, her face hidden. Her dream, the one that had once burned so bright, felt like a fading candle. But she didn't know that someone else had been watching her the entire time, from a distance. The Navy SEAL commander stood with his arms folded, his eyes sharp and thoughtful. Unlike the others, he didn't mock. He didn't laugh. He didn't turn away. He saw something different in her failures. Something hidden beneath the weakness. And for the first time, she felt his gaze. She looked up, her eyes meeting his across. The field, it was only a second. But in that second, something changed. The commander didn't speak. He didn't nod. He only turned and walked away. But the silence of his watchful eyes spoke louder than any insult she had ever heard. It said, "You are not invisible. I see you. I'm waiting." Night fell heavy over the camp. The sky was dark, the stars faint, and the barracks were filled with the sound of exhausted bodies collapsing into bunks. But she couldn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. Every laugh, every insult, every failure replayed in her head like a cruel movie. The rope she couldn't climb, shots she couldn't land, the wall she couldn't cross. Her heart ached with shame. She turned to her side, pulling the thin blanket over her. Tears slipped quietly down her cheeks. She pressed her hand to her mouth so no one would hear her sobs, because if anyone saw her cry, they would say she was weak again. She couldn't bear it. But inside she felt broken. She remembered the day she applied for the military. Her family had laughed. Her neighbors had shaken their heads. "You're not built for this," they told her. "The military isn't for girls like you." But she didn't listen. She wanted to prove them wrong. She wanted to show she had the strength to fight, the courage to stand, the will to survive. Now, here she was, proving them right instead. Her dream, the one she carried for years, was slipping away. The next morning, she dragged herself out of bed when the whistle blew. Her eyes were swollen, her face pale, but she stood in line anyway. The drills began again. Running push-ups, climbing, crawling. Each one felt like torture. Her body screamed with pain, but she forced herself to keep moving, and still. She failed. By midday, she collapsed during a sprint. Her legs gave out, and she hit the ground hard. Dust filled her lungs as she coughed, her chest heaving. The sergeant stared down at her, his face cold. "You don't belong here," he said flatly. "You are wasting my time."
You're wasting their time.
"You are wasting your time." The words cut deeper than a knife. The recruits looked at her with pity or, worse, with disgust. She wanted to shout back, to say, "I belong here. I can do this." But her throat was dry, her voice trapped inside her. She stood slowly, her body trembling, forced herself back into line. But in her heart, she was breaking. That night, she sat outside the barracks. The camp was quiet, only the sound of crickets in the distance. The moonlight fell on her face as she hugged her knees. Staring at the dirt beneath her boots, she whispered to herself, "Maybe they're right. Maybe I don't belong here." Her chest tightened. Tears filled her eyes again, for the first time. She thought seriously about quitting. But just as that thought took shape, she heard footsteps behind her. Heavy, steady footsteps that made the ground seem to shake. She turned her head and froze. It was the Navy SEAL commander. He stood tall, his shadow long in the moonlight, his uniform crisp. His presence carried a weight that silenced the night. A moment, she couldn't breathe. He didn't speak right away, just looked at her, his eyes sharp but unreadable. She felt as if he could see straight into her soul, past all her failures, past all her fears. Her voice trembled. "Commander, She stopped, unsure of what to say. Still, he remained silent. Finally, he stepped closer. His boots crunched against the gravel. He stopped right in front of her and looked down. "You want to quit?" he asked. His voice was deep, steady, almost calm. Her lips parted, but no words came. "You think you don't belong here?" continued. She swallowed hard, tears sliding down her cheeks. I keep failing. Every day, every test. I can't keep up. Everyone's right, I don't belong." The words escaped her in a whisper, but they carried all the pain in her heart. The commander studied her face for a long moment. His expression didn't change, but his eyes grew sharper. Then, without another word, he leaned down. His face came close to hers, his voice dropping low, and in that moment, he whispered a command. One command that would change everything. The sun burned hot over the training field. The recruits lined up, sweat already running down their faces. Today's drill was the obstacle course, again the test that measured speed, strength, and endurance all at once. Walls to climb, nets to crawl under, mud pits to cross, logs to carry. The course stretched wide, long, and merciless. The sergeant blew the whistle. Go. The recruits exploded forward, running with everything they had. Boots pounded the dirt, dust rose in. The air shouts filled the field. She ran too. Her body was still sore from the night before. Her arms still weak, her chest heavy. But her mind replayed the moment with the SEAL commander. The way he had leaned down, the way he had whispered one command. His words echoed inside her. It's louder than the mocking voices, louder than her doubts. Stop fighting yourself. She didn't fully understand what it meant, but something about it gave her strength. She reached the first wall. Last time she had failed here. Last time she had slipped and fallen while others laughed. Now, she stood before it again. She took a deep breath. She jumped, grabbed the top, and pulled. Her arms shook, her knees scraped, but she didn't let go. She didn't think of falling. She didn't think of fear. She thought only of climbing. And then she was over. She landed on the other side, her boots hitting the dirt. Her chest heaved, her heart raced. But her lips curled into the smallest smile. For the first time, she had crossed the first wall. But the course wasn't over. Next came the nets. She dropped to her stomach, crawling fast. Dirt filled her uniform. Rocks scraped her elbows, but she kept moving. Bullets cracked in the air above as part of the drill, but she didn't freeze this time. She pushed forward, inch by inch, her body close to the ground. Her focus sharp. She came out on the other side. Faster than before. Then came the mud pit. The recruits ahead of her splashed through, their uniforms heavy and wet. She jumped in. The mud clung to her legs, pulling her down, but she forced her knees higher, step after step, her arms pumped. Her face was streaked with dirt, but she kept moving. She remembered the commander's eyes, the way they didn't mock her, the way they didn't pity her. And suddenly, she wanted to prove not just to herself, but to him that she could do. She dragged herself out of the mud, coughing, her body trembling. But she was still in the race. The final stretch was the hardest. Carrying the heavy log across the field, 2 recruits grabbed theirs and lifted it easily. Another hoisted his onto his shoulders. With a roar, she walked to her log. It looked bigger than her. Her arms shook just from touching it. For a moment, her old fear returned. She remembered every failure, every laugh, every insult. But then, again his words echoed. Stop fighting yourself. She bent her knees, grabbed the log, and lifted. Her body screamed in pain. Her arms burned. Her back ached. But she didn't drop it. Step by step, she carried it forward. The log pressed down on her shoulders, her vision blurred with sweat. Other recruits passed. But she didn't stop. Every step felt like war. But finally, she reached the finish line. Her knees buckled, and the log crashed to the ground. She fell with it, her hands pressing into the dirt. Silence. The recruits who had mocked her before stared, their mouths open. She had finished. Not first, not second. Sergeant's eyes narrowed. For the first time, he didn't look at her with disgust. He looked at her with something else. Respect. And in the distance, the Navy SEAL commander stood with his arms crossed. His face didn't change. He didn't smile. He didn't nod. But she saw it. He was watching, and this time, she didn't feel like a failure. The evening sky glowed orange as the sun set over the base. The day's drills were over, and the recruits dragged themselves back to the barracks. Some laughing, some groaning. She walked slowly, her uniform heavy with mud, her muscles aching from the obstacle course. Every step was pain, but inside her chest, there was something new, something small but alive. Pride, for the first time. She had finished. Not perfectly, not quickly. But she had made it to the end. The voices of doubt still whispered in her head. But tonight they were quieter. They no longer screamed failure. She sat on her bunk, her hands trembling as she unlaced her boots. Across the room, a few recruits were whispering. Their eyes flicked toward her. Normally, she would lower her head, hide, pretend not to hear, but now. She looked up. One of them muttered, "Did you see her carry that log? Thought she'd drop it?" Another replied, "Yeah, but she didn't." The words weren't praise, not yet. But they weren't insults either. And that was enough to make her chest tighten with hope. She lay back on her bed, staring at the ceiling. She remembered the commander's voice. "Stop fighting yourself." She whispered the words to herself over and over until her eyes grew. Heavy, that night, for the first time since joining the military, she slept without tears. The next morning, the whistle blew before dawn. Recruits scrambled out of bed, boots pounding on the floor, uniforms flying on. The sergeant barked orders, his voice sharp. "Outside. Line up." He ran into the cold morning air. Mist hung low over the ground, the grass still wet with dew. The smell of damp earth filled their lungs. She stood in formation, her body stiff, her breath visible in the chilly air. Today's drill was endurance running miles of endless dirt road. No breaks, no excuses. Many dreaded it, for it tested not strength, but willpower. "Move," the sergeant shouted. The recruits surged forward, boots striking in rhythm. Some pushed ahead, determined to lead. Others hung back, saving energy. She ran in the middle, her arms pumping, her breaths deep and steady. Her legs still ached from yesterday, but she refused to slow. Step by step, she found her rhythm, but soon. The road stretched endless before her. The leaders were far ahead, their bodies strong and fast. The weaker ones were already falling behind, gasping for air. Her heart pounded harder, her lungs burned, her throat went dry. The old voice inside her rose again. "You can't do this. You'll fall, you'll quit, you'll fail like before." Her pace faltered. Doubt wrapped around her chest like chains, and then she heard it. A calm, steady voice, not shouted. It's not loud, just a whisper carried by memory. "Stop fighting yourself." She clenched her fists tighter. Her breaths came ragged, but she forced herself to keep running. The road blurred, her vision dimmed, but she didn't stop. Step after step, she kept going. Recruits began dropping out, collapsing by the roadside, groaning in pain. The sergeant screamed at them, but she kept running. Her body screamed too. Every muscle begged her to quit, but her heart told her to keep moving. By the time the whistle finally blew to stop, her legs were numb, her chest felt like fire. She stumbled forward, nearly falling. But when she looked around, she realized something. She wasn't last. For the first time, she wasn't last. Her chest swelled. Her lips trembled. Not from weakness, but from something close to joy. The recruits who noticed her didn't laugh this time. Some even nodded, small, silent acknowledgments. And then she saw him. The SEAL commander stood at the edge of the field, arms folded, watching her. Their eyes met for just a second. He didn't smile. He didn't speak, but she knew he had seen her, and that was enough to carry her through the pain. That night, lying on her bunk, she thought of the day again. Yes, her body hurt. Yes, she was still slower, weaker, clumsier than most. But something inside her was changing. The whispers of failure were fading, and in their place, a new voice had begun to rise. Her own "I can." She closed her eyes, holding on to that thought. Tomorrow, she knew, would bring another test. Another chance to fail. Another chance to rise. And for the first time, she looked forward to it. The morning was colder than usual. A thin fog wrapped around the training field, making everything look ghostly. The recruits lined up, shivering in their uniforms, waiting for orders. The sergeant paced in front of them, his boots crunching on the gravel. His voice broke the silence. Today, weapons training. A murmur ran through the recruits. Some smiled finally, something exciting. Others stiffened with nerves. Handling rifles meant precision, calm, and focus. Any mistake could mean failure. She swallowed hard. Weapons training. She had never been good with rifles. Her aim was shaky. Her hands trembled. And every time she missed the target, the laughter of others had cut deeper than any bullet. Now, as they were handed rifles, her palms were already sweaty. The sergeant barked again. Safety first. Positions. The recruits dropped into prone positions, rifles in hand, eyes on the targets down the range. The metallic smell of gun oil filled the air. The first round began. Crack, crack, crack. Shots echoed across the field. Targets rattled as bullets hit them. Dust rose. Casings clinked on the ground. She aimed her finger on the trigger. Her breath shook. She fired. The bullet missed. She fired again. Missed again. Her throat tightened. Around her, other recruits were hitting their marks, their faces confident. Her target stood untouched, mocking her. The sergeant growled. Pathetic. You'll never survive with that aim. Heat rushed to her face. Shame burned in her chest. She lowered the rifle, her arms trembling. The same voices screamed inside her head. You're weak. You don't belong here. You'll never pass. Then behind her she felt a shadow. The SEAL commander. He didn't speak loudly. He didn't lecture her like the sergeant. Instead, he leaned close, his voice barely a whisper, Breathe with the bullet. Her eyes widened. She didn't understand. He didn't explain. Just stood there, calm, silent, like a wall of strength. Her hands still shook, but she lifted the rifle again. She lay flat, pressed her cheek to the stock, and aimed down the sight. She closed her eyes for a moment, opened them again. Breathe with the bullet, his words echoed. She inhaled slowly, exhaled slowly. This time she didn't fight the fear. She didn't rush. She just breathed. Her finger squeezed the trigger. Crack. The bullet flew. The target jumped. She blinked. Her shot had landed close to the center. Not perfect, but a hit. Chest filled with something warm. Hope. She tried again. No. This time she matched her breathing to the rhythm of the rifle. Inhale, exhale, squeeze, crack. Another hit. Closer to the bullseye. Her lips trembled. She almost wanted to cry. Around her, a few recruits noticed. Their eyes widened. One muttered, "She hit it." She ignored them. She fired again and again. Each shot steadier than the last. By the end of the round, her target was marked with holes. Not perfect, not flawless, but proof that she could do. She lowered the rifle, her arms still trembling, but this time, from something other than fear. When she turned, the commander was already walking away. He didn't wait for thanks. He didn't even look back. But she knew what had happened. One whisper, one command, and everything had changed. That night, lying in her bunk, she replayed his words again. Breathe with the bullet she held on to. Them like a lifeline, for the first time. She believed she might survive this place, not because the sergeant believed in her, not because the recruits accepted her, but because deep down she had begun to believe in herself. The night was dark, the sky covered with thick clouds. No moon, no stars, only silence. Then the siren wailed. The recruits jumped out of their bunks in shock. Boots hit the floor, uniforms were pulled on in panic. The sergeant's voice boomed through the barracks. Night combat simulation. Move, move, move. Adrenaline surged through every recruit. They ran outside into the cold night. The training field looked different and the dark shadows stretched long. The air felt heavy, every sound sharper. She stood in line, her heart pounding like a drum. She had survived the obstacle course. She had endured the run. She had hit her target with the rifle. But this was different. This was chaos. The sergeant barked the rules. Enemy out there in the dark. Targets hidden. You'll move in teams. No excuses, no fear. Fail here, and you fail for real. Her throat went dry. Teams formed quickly. Recruits grouped with their friends, with those they trusted. She stood alone, uncertain. No one rushed to her side. Then a sharp voice cut through. "You. With me." She turned. The SEAL commander stood a few steps away, already geared up. His presence was steady, unshakable, like a mountain in the night. Her chest tightened. Of all people, he wanted her on his team. She nodded quickly, falling into. Stepped beside him. They moved into the dark. The field was a maze of shadows. Distant pops of gunfire cracked the silence as other teams engaged targets. Red lights flashed in the distance, simulating explosions. Shouts echoed through the fog. Her hands trembled on the rifle. Every shadow looked like an enemy. Every sound made her flinch. She tripped on a root, nearly falling. The commander caught her arm before she hit the ground. His grip was firm but calm. "Focus," he whispered. "The dark is only fear if you let it be." Her breaths came shallow, but she forced herself to nod. They moved again, crouched low, scanning the field. Suddenly movement. A target popped up from behind a barrier, glowing faintly in the night. She froze. "Shoot," the commander whispered. Her finger hovered on the trigger. Her body screamed with fear. "Breathe with the bullet," he reminded her softly. She inhaled, exhaled. Crack. The target dropped. Her heart leapt in her chest. She had done it. Another target appeared. She fired again. Hit. Then another. At another. Her fear was still there, but it no longer controlled her. Each shot steadied her hands. Each breath calmed her heart. For the first time, she felt capable. They moved deeper into the dark. At one point, voices of other recruits rang out. "She won't last 5 minutes out here," one sneered. She heard it. The words stung, but this time she didn't lower her head. She kept moving, her eyes forward. The commander said nothing, but his silence was heavy, powerful at the final checkpoint. The siren blared again, signaling the end of the simulation. Recruits stumbled back to the field, some laughing, some groaning, some covered in dirt. The sergeant checked their scores. When he reached her, his eyes narrowed. He read the sheet twice, as if he couldn't believe it. 4 targets hit, no misses. The hush fell over the group. The same recruits who once laughed now stared in. Shock. She stood, rifle at her side, sweat dripping down her face, chest rising and falling. But this time, she didn't look broken. She looked alive. The commander gave no praise, no applause. He simply walked past her, his shadow long in the moonless night. But as he passed, his voice brushed her ear once more. "Now you're starting to see." Her eyes widened. See what? The question burned in her mind long after the night ended. Morning sunlight spilled across the training field, but the air was colder than usual. Recruits gathered for roll call, their uniforms sharp, their boots polished, but there was tension in the air. Whispers moved through the line. Low but sharp like knives. "She's only hitting targets because the SEAL helps her. She'd fail without him. She doesn't deserve to be here." The words weren't shouted, but she heard them. Every syllable burned in her ears. Her hands tightened into fists at her sides. She wanted to turn and yell, to fight back. She didn't. Not yet. The sergeant's voice broke through. "Today, survival training in pairs. No second chances. Fail here, and you're out. Double quotes, pairs." Her chest tightened. She knew what was coming. The recruits immediately partnered with. Friends, laughter, handshakes, confidence filled the field. When the dust settled, she was left standing alone. Again the sergeant looked down the line. "No partner, then you don't belong here." Her throat closed. The shame threatened to crush her chest. But then a voice cut through the silence. "I'll take her." Her head turned. The SEAL commander stood tall, his face unreadable, his arms crossed. The recruits gasped. Some smirked. Others rolled their eyes. Figures one muttered, "She needs her babysitter." Another sneered. The sergeant hesitated, then nodded. "Fine, she's yours." And just like that, she was paired with the one man everyone feared, respected, and whispered about. They were sent into the forest. For survival training, just the two of them, no one else. The trees loomed tall, blocking out most of the sunlight. The air was damp, heavy with the smell of earth and leaves. Her heart pounded as they walked deeper into the woods. She finally spoke. "Why? Why do you keep helping me?" The commander didn't look at her. His eyes scanned the trees, always alert. "I don't help you," he said quietly. "I show you what you already have." She frowned, confused. Talking, he cut her off. "Listen." They stopped. Silence wrapped around them. She closed her eyes. At first, she heard nothing but her own nervous breath, but slowly, other sounds appeared. The rustle of leaves, the crack of a twig in the distance, the call of a bird overhead, the faint rush of water nearby. Her eyes opened wide. She had never noticed these things before. "That's survival," the commander said softly. "Not strength, not speed. Awareness. The world tells you what you need if you listen." She nodded slowly, his words sinking into her heart. Hours passed. They built a shelter from branches. They started a fire with nothing but flint and patience. They found water, filtered it with cloth and sand. She worked clumsily at first, her fingers shaking. But with every mistake, the commander said nothing cruel, nothing sharp. He just repeated his whispers. Short, simple, calm, focus, slow. Down, trust yourself. By sunset, their camp stood ready. She stared at the fire, the warm glow dancing in her eyes. For the first time, she had made something with her own hands, something real, something that meant survival. The commander sat across from her, his face lit by the flames. He didn't smile. He didn't speak, but his silence carried more weight than words, and she realized slowly, painfully, that the other recruits were wrong. He wasn't saving her. He was teaching her how to save herself. Back at the base, when the pairs returned, the recruits stared as she walked beside the SEAL commander. Her uniform was dirty, her hands scratched, but her eyes were steady. Someone muttered, "She won't last much longer." But another replied quietly, "Are you sure? Did you see her eyes?" That night as she lay in her bunk, she replayed the day's lessons again. Awareness. Trust yourself. For the first time, she wasn't afraid of tomorrow. She was waiting for it. The next morning, the recruits gathered on the field, the sun barely rising over the horizon. The air was sharp and cold, but the tension among them was hotter than fire. Whispers floated again. Sharper now. She thinks she's special just because the SEAL picks her. She'll fall soon enough. She's weak. Always was. Always will be. She kept her eyes forward, her hands clenched at her sides. Every word dug into her like a knife. But she refused to lower her head. The sergeant stepped forward, his voice loud and cruel. "Today we test the one thing none of you can fake: strength." He pointed to the center of the field, where heavy sandbags and giant tires were lined up. Strength trials. Carry, flip, drag. No excuses. If you fall behind, you're out. Groans rippled through the group. Strength tests were brutal. They separated the strongest from the weakest, and everyone expected her to fail. The recruits lined up. One by one, they lifted sandbags, flipped tires, dragged weighted sleds across the dirt. Sweat poured, grunts echoed, muscles strained. When her turn came, laughter broke out before she even touched the sandbag. "She won't move it an inch. Bet she quits in the first minute." She bent down, gripping the sandbag. It felt heavier than stone, her arms already trembling. The old fear returned. Her chest tightened. She wanted to give up before even trying, and then she heard it. A whisper. Not from memory this time, but from nearby. The CL commander. Standing at the edge of the field, arms crossed, eyes steady. "Lift with your heart, not just your arms." She gritted her teeth, bent her knees, and pulled. The sandbag rose, gasps rippled through the line. Her arms shook violently, her back screamed in pain, but she took one step forward, then another. Step by step, she carried the bag across the field when she dropped it at the end. Her knees almost gave out, but she had finished. The smirks on the recruits' faces faded. Next came the tire flip. The tire was taller than her waist, thick, heavy, coated in dust. She crouched, her palms pressed against the rubber. She pushed, it didn't move. The recruits laughed. "See? Done already." But she didn't stop. She repositioned her feet, inhaled deeply, exhaled slowly. "Stop fighting yourself," she remembered. She pushed again, this time with every part of her body. Her arms strained, her legs shook, her shoulders screamed. The tire shifted, she roared, and shoved harder. The tire flipped. The laughter stopped. One by one, she flipped it down the field. Not fast, not graceful, but relentless. When it slammed down for the final time, silence filled the air. Her uniform was soaked with sweat, her muscles trembling, her breaths ragged, but she was still standing. The last challenge was the sled drag. A weighted sled with ropes attached. Recruits had collapsed trying to pull it. Some had cried. She grabbed the rope, wrapped it around her hands, leaned forward, and pulled. At first it didn't move. Her boots dug into the dirt, her arms burned. The recruits waited for her to fail, but then, slowly, the sled shifted. Inch by inch, she dragged it forward. Her legs screamed. Her chest felt like fire, but she didn't stop. She thought of every insult, every laugh, every time she had fallen. She thought of the CL's voice. "Trust yourself, step by step." She pulled until the sled crossed the line. And then she collapsed to her knees, tears mixing with sweat. The sergeant stared at her, his face unreadable. The recruits were silent. Not one laugh, not one insult, because what they had just seen was impossible. The weakest recruit the won. They all mocked had finished every test, and standing in the shadows, the commander's eyes locked on her for the first time. His lips moved into the faintest hint of a smile, and she saw it. He believed in her. The camp was restless that night. Some recruits whispered. Others lay awake staring at the ceiling, but not her. She sat quietly on her bunk, her body aching, but her spirit strangely calm. She had carried the sandbag, flipped the tire, dragged the sled. She had done what no one thought she could, but victories had a price. The more she succeeded, the colder the room around her became. Whispers turned to glares, smirks turned to clenched jaws. Her progress had made enemies. The next morning, the recruits assembled on the field. The sergeant barked, "Team drills today, trust your partner or fail together." The words hit her hard. Trust. Partner. Two things she had never truly had here. The teams were formed quickly. But when her name was called, two recruits stepped forward first. Big, strong, confident. They smirked when they saw her. "We'll take her," one said. His voice dripped with sarcasm. The sergeant nodded, not noticing the look in their eyes. She knew that look. Not teammates, not partners. Predators. The drill was brutal. Teams had to cross a course carrying heavy gear, crawling through mud, and climbing ropes all while staying together. She tried to keep up, carrying her share of the gear, but the two recruits made it worse. They moved too fast on purpose, leaving her struggling behind. When she stumbled, one muttered, "Weak link." When she tripped, the other sneered, "Dragging us down." Still she pushed herself, refusing to quit. But then came the rope climb. The recruits scrambled up quickly, their bodies strong and steady. She grabbed the rope, pulled herself up, but halfway, her arms shook. Her grip slipped. She dangled there, breathless. Above her, one of the recruits looked down. Instead of offering a hand, he smirked. "Hurry up, or maybe just fall." Her chest tightened. For a moment, the fear of falling froze her. Then, like a spark in the darkness, she remembered the whispers of the commander. "Stop fighting yourself. Trust yourself. Breathe with the bullet." They weren't just commands. They were pieces of something bigger. She inhaled deeply, exhaled. Her arms steadied. She pulled higher and higher. The recruits above went silent, their smirks fading. She reached the top, pulled herself over, and rolled onto the platform. When she stood, her chest heaving, the two recruits stared. Their plan had failed, but their eyes promised something else. This wasn't over. At the finish line, the sergeant barked, "Not bad. Even you three finished faster than I expected." Recruits nodded, hiding their frustration. She stayed quiet, her body trembling with exhaustion, but her eyes burned with quiet fire. Back in the barracks, one of them whispered near her bunk. His words were low, cold. "Next time you won't get so lucky." She said nothing. But as she lay on her bunk, staring at the ceiling, her heart didn't sink like before, because deep down, she knew something they didn't. She wasn't fighting alone anymore. She had her own strength. And in the shadows of the camp, the SEAL commander had seen everything. The sun was brutal the next morning. Heat shimmered across the training ground, making the dirt look like fire. The recruits lined up, sweat already pouring down their faces. The sergeant's voice thundered, "Today you face the water drill. Carry your packs, cross the river, and return as a team. No excuses." A groan rippled through the line. Everyone knew the river. Its current was strong, its water freezing, its bed slippery with hidden rocks. For her, this was another chance to failure, another chance to rise. When the teams were assigned, fate struck again. She was placed with the same two recruits who had tried to break her the day before. Their eyes met hers, filled with quiet malice. This time, they weren't just planning to humiliate her. They were planning to make her quit. The whistle blew. The recruits charged forward, splashing into the river. Water surged around their knees. then their waists, then their chests. She held the strap of her pack tight, her breath sharp as the cold water bit into her skin. The current pushed hard, dragging her sideways. She fought it, but her body felt like lead. One of the recruits hissed at her, "Move faster." But instead of helping, they surged ahead, leaving her behind to battle the river alone. The current grew stronger. She stumbled, slipped on a rock, and went under. The world turned black. Water filled her ears, her mouth. Panic screamed inside her chest. No, not like this. She kicked, thrashed, desperate to find the surface. Her pack pulled her down, dragging her deeper. Her lungs burned. Her mind screamed. Then, like a memory carved into her bones, she heard the commander's whisper. "Stop fighting yourself. Breathe with the bullet. Trust your body." She couldn't breathe underwater. Could trust her body? She let herself go still, stopped thrashing, and found her balance. Her hands loosened, her legs moved steady. She pushed off the riverbed, rising. Her head broke the surface. Air rushed into her lungs like fire. On the riverbank, some recruits gasped. The two who had abandoned her glanced back, expecting to see her drowning. Instead, they froze. She was moving forward again. Not fast, not strong, but steady. Each step planted with purpose. The river still fought her, but she no longer panicked. She had found rhythm in the chaos, and slowly, against all odds, she made it across. When her boots hit the far bank, she collapsed to her knees, coughing, her body shaking with exhaustion. The sergeant's eyes were wide. He had seen many drown. In this drill, few ever made it after going under. But she had. Alone. The two recruits reached the shore ahead of her, pretending to celebrate their victory. But their grins looked thin now, because no matter how much they tried to bury her, she refused to stay down. As she caught her breath, she felt a strange presence nearby. She looked up, panned. There he was again. The SEAL commander, silent. Watching his face revealed nothing. But his eyes told the truth. He had seen her fall, had seen her rise, and he knew Shay was changing. She wasn't just surviving the tests anymore, she was learning. The camp buzzed after the river drill. Some whispered about her survival. Others shook their heads, calling it luck. But deep down, everyone felt the same unease. She was no longer the weakest recruit. She was becoming something else. The sergeant wasted no time. "Next, test strength under fire," he barked. The recruits lined up in front of a long field scattered with heavy logs, barrels, and sandbags. The task was clear. Carry the weight across while instructors fired blanks overhead. The sound was deafening, the pressure suffocating. It wasn't just about strength. It was about keeping calm while chaos exploded all around. For her, it felt impossible. She had barely survived the earlier drills. And now weight and fear would crush her at once. Her hands shook as she gripped the sandbag. Around her, other recruits hefted theirs with ease. Some smirked, waiting for her to collapse. Whistle blew. Gunfire cracked. Smoke filled the air. The recruits charged forward. She staggered at first, the sandbag nearly pulling her down. Her knees trembled. Her breath came in gasps. Bang. Bang. The blanks echoed like thunder. Dust stung her eyes. Her mind screamed, too heavy, too loud, too much. She almost dropped the bag, almost quit. But then, through the smoke, she saw him again, the SEAL commander. Standing far in the distance, silent, watching, and though she could not hear his voice, she remembered it clear as fire in her veins. "Stop fighting yourself. Trust your body. Breathe." She inhaled, slow, steady. The noise faded as the chaos dulled. Her legs no longer wobbled. Her grip no longer slipped. Step by step, she moved forward. The sandbag grew lighter, not because it weighed less, but because her mind stopped fighting against it. Bang. Gunfire roared again. But this time she didn't flinch. She kept walking, her eyes locked ahead. One recruit tripped beside her, rolling in the dirt. Another dropped his bag, cursing, but she kept moving. When she reached the halfway mark, something incredible happened. She didn't just carry her own sandbag, she bent down, grabbed a second one from the ground, and lifted it onto her shoulder. The crowd gasped. Even the sergeant's mouth opened in shock. The woman who once failed every drill was now carrying double the weight, and she wasn't stopping. Step by step, sweat dripping, chest burning, she reached the finish line. The sergeant blew the whistle. Ending the drill, silence. Every recruit turned to stare at her, some in disbelief, some in envy, some in fear. The two who had tried to break her exchanged dark glances. Their plan was slipping away. She dropped the bags, her body shaking, but her eyes fierce. For the first time, she didn't look beaten. She looked unstoppable. The commander walked closer, his boots echoing on the ground. He didn't smile. He didn't clap. But as he passed by, his voice was low, meant only for her. "Now you're starting to understand." And then she collapsed to her knees, tears mixing with sweat. The sergeant stared at her, his face unreadable. The recruits were silent. Not one laugh, not one insult, because what they had just seen was impossible. The weakest recruit, the one they all mocked, had finished every test. And standing in the shadows, the commander's eyes locked on her for the first time. His lips moved into the faintest hint of a smile, and she saw it. He believed in her. The camp was restless that night. Some recruits whispered. Others lay awake staring at the ceiling, but not her. She sat quietly on her bunk, her body aching, but her spirit strangely calm. She had carried the sandbag, flipped the tire, dragged the sled. She had done what no one thought she could. But victories had a price. The more she succeeded, the colder the room around her became. Whispers turned to glares. Smirks turned to clenched jaws. Her progress had made enemies. The next morning, the recruits assembled on the field. The sergeant barked, "Team drills today. Trust your partner or fail together." The words hit her hard. Trust. Partner. Two things she had never truly had here. The teams were formed quickly. But when her name was called, two recruits stepped forward first. Big, strong, confident. They smirked when they saw her. "We'll take her," one said. His voice dripped with sarcasm. The sergeant nodded, not noticing the look in their eyes. She knew that look. Not teammates, not partners. Predators. The drill was brutal. Teams had to cross a course carrying heavy gear, crawling through mud, and climbing ropes all while staying together. She tried to keep up, carrying her share of the gear, but the two recruits made it worse. They moved too fast on purpose, leaving her struggling behind. When she stumbled, one muttered, "Weak link." When she tripped, the other sneered, dragging us down. Still she pushed herself, refusing to quit. But then came the rope climb. The recruits scrambled up quickly, their bodies strong and steady. She grabbed the rope, pulled herself up, but halfway, her arms shook. Her grip slipped. She dangled there, breathless. Above her, one of the recruits looked down. Instead of offering a hand, he smirked. "Hurry up, or maybe just fall." Her chest tightened. For a moment, the fear of falling froze her. Then, like a spark in the darkness, she remembered the whispers of the commander. "Stop fighting yourself. Trust yourself. Breathe with the bullet." They weren't just commands. They were pieces of something bigger. She inhaled deeply, exhaled. Her arms steadied. She pulled higher and higher. The recruits above went silent, their smirks fading. She reached the top, pulled herself over, and rolled onto the platform. When she stood, her chest heaving, the two recruits stared. Their plan had failed, but their eyes promised something else. This wasn't over. At the finish line, the sergeant barked, "Not bad. Even you three finished faster than I expected." Recruits nodded, hiding their frustration. She stayed quiet, her body trembling with exhaustion, but her eyes burned with quiet fire. Back in the barracks, one of them whispered near her bunk. His words were low, cold. "Next time you won't get so lucky." She said nothing. But as she lay on her bunk, staring at the ceiling, her heart didn't sink like before. because deep down, she knew something they didn't. She wasn't fighting alone anymore. She had her own strength. And in the shadows of the camp, the SEAL commander had seen everything. The sun was brutal the next morning. Heat shimmered across the training ground, making the dirt look like fire. The recruits lined up, sweat already pouring down their faces. The sergeant's voice thundered, "Today you face the water drill. Carry your packs, cross the river, and return as a team. No excuses." A groan rippled through the line. Everyone knew the river. Its current was strong, its water freezing, its bed slippery with hidden rocks. For her, this was another chance to failure, another chance to rise. When the teams were assigned, fate struck again. She was placed with the same two recruits who had tried to break her the day before. Their eyes met hers, filled with quiet malice. This time, they weren't just planning to humiliate her. They were planning to make her quit. The whistle blew. The recruits charged forward, splashing into the river. Water surged around their knees, then their waists, then their chests. She held the strap of her pack tight, her breath sharp as the cold water bit into her skin. The current pushed hard, dragging her sideways. She fought it, but her body felt like lead. One of the recruits hissed at her, "Move faster." But instead of helping, they surged ahead, leaving her behind to battle the river alone. The current grew stronger. She stumbled, slipped on a rock, and went under. The world turned black. Water filled her ears, her mouth. Panic screamed inside her chest. No, not like this. She kicked, thrashed, desperate to find the surface. Her pack pulled her down, dragging her deeper. Her lungs burned. Her mind screamed. Then, like a memory carved into her bones, she heard the commander's whisper, "Stop fighting yourself. Breathe with the bullet. Trust your body." She couldn't breathe underwater. Could trust her body? She let herself go still, stopped thrashing, and found her balance. Her hands loosened, her legs moved steady. She pushed off the riverbed, rising. Her head broke the surface. Air rushed into her lungs like fire. On the riverbank, some recruits gasped. The two who had abandoned her glanced back, expecting to see her drowning. Instead, they froze. She was moving forward again. Not fast, not strong, but steady. Each step planted with purpose. The river still fought her, but she no longer panicked. She had found rhythm in the chaos, and slowly, against all odds, she made it across. When her boots hit the far bank, she collapsed to her knees, coughing, her body shaking with exhaustion. The sergeant's eyes were wide. He had seen many drown. In this drill, few ever made it after going under. But she had. Alone. The two recruits reached the shore ahead of her, pretending to celebrate their victory. But their grins looked thin now, because no matter how much they tried to bury her, she refused to stay down. As she caught her breath, she felt a strange presence nearby. She looked up, and there he was again. The SEAL commander, silent. Watching his face revealed nothing, but his eyes told the truth. He had seen her fall, had seen her rise, and he knew Shay was changing. She wasn't just surviving the tests. Anymore, she was learning. The camp buzzed after the river drill. Some whispered about her survival. Others shook their heads, calling it luck. But deep down, everyone felt the same unease. She was no longer the weakest recruit. She was becoming something else. The sergeant wasted no time. "Next, test strength under fire," he barked. The recruits lined up in front of a long field scattered with heavy logs, barrels, and sandbags. The task was clear. Carry the weight across while instructors fired blanks overhead. The sound was deafening, the pressure suffocating. It wasn't just about strength. It was about keeping calm while chaos exploded all around. For her, it felt impossible. She had barely survived the earlier drills. And now weight and fear would crush her at once. Her hands shook as she gripped the sandbag. Around her, other recruits hefted theirs with ease. Some smirked, waiting for her to collapse. Whistle blew. Gunfire cracked. Smoke filled the air. The recruits charged forward. She staggered at first, the sandbag nearly pulling her down. Her knees trembled, her breath came in gasps. Bang! Bang! The blanks echoed like thunder. Dust stung her eyes. Her mind screamed, too heavy, too loud, too much. She almost dropped the bag, almost quit. But then, through the smoke, she saw him again, the SEAL commander. Standing far in the distance, silent, watching, and though she could not hear his voice, she remembered it clear as fire in her veins. Stop fighting yourself. Trust your body. Breathe. She inhaled, slow, steady. The noise faded. As the chaos dulled, her legs no longer wobbled. Her grip no longer slipped. Step by step, she moved forward. The sandbag grew lighter, not because it weighed less, but because her mind stopped fighting against it. Bang. Gunfire roared again, but this time she didn't flinch. She kept walking, her eyes locked ahead. One recruit tripped beside her, rolling in the dirt. Another dropped his bag, cursing, but she kept moving. When she reached the halfway mark, something incredible happened. She didn't just carry her own sandbag, she bent down, grabbed a second one from the ground, and lifted it onto her shoulder. The crowd gasped. Even the sergeant's mouth opened in shock. The woman who once failed every drill was now carrying double the weight, and she wasn't stopping. Step by step, sweat dripping, chest burning, she reached the finish line. The sergeant blew the whistle. Ending the drill, silence. Every recruit turned to stare at her, some in disbelief, some in envy, some in fear. The two who had tried to break her exchanged dark glances. Their plan was slipping away. She dropped the bags, her body shaking, but her eyes fierce. For the first time, she didn't look beaten. She looked unstoppable. The commander walked closer, his boots echoing on the ground. He didn't smile. He didn't clap. But as he passed by, his voice was low, meant only for her. Now you're starting to understand. The night before the final test, the camp was silent. Some recruits slept soundly, dreaming of victory. Others whispered in the dark, nervous about what was coming. But she lay awake on her bunk, staring at the ceiling. Her body was tired, her muscles sore, yet her mind burned like fire. Tomorrow would decide everything. Past and she would earn respect. Fail in every struggle would mean nothing. She turned her head and noticed the two recruits across the room. Their eyes were open, watching her, not with fear, but with something darker. They weren't done with her yet. Morning came. The sky was gray. The air heavy as the recruits gathered at the training field. The sergeant's voice was sharp. Final drill, endurance, and teamwork. Cross the field, survive the obstacles, and finish as one unit. Only then will you pass. The recruits nodded. Some smiled with confidence, but she felt the weight of eyes on her. The two recruits, standing close, whispering to each other. Their smirks told her everything. They didn't want to win. They wanted her gone. The whistle blew. Chaos erupted. Recruits charged forward, climbing walls, crawling under barbed wire, dragging heavy sleds. She ran too, her lungs burning, mud splashing across her face. She pushed hard, refusing to fall behind. But halfway across the course, it happened. One of the recruits shoved her shoulder, sending her crashing into the mud. The other leaned down, whispering with venom, "This is where you quit." They sprinted ahead, leaving her on the ground. Her chest heaved. Pain shot through her arms. For a moment, she thought about staying down, about letting the mud swallow her. But then through the haze of exhaustion, she saw a figure standing at the edge of the field. The SEAL commander. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't moving. He was just watching, waiting. And in that silence, she remembered every whisper, every word he had given her. Stop fighting yourself. Trust your body. Breathe with the bullet. She pressed her hands into the mud. Her legs trembled, but she rose. One step, then another. The barbed wire cut her sleeves as she crawled. The logs bruised her shoulders as she carried them. The mud tried to swallow her boots, but she didn't stop. The two recruits were ahead, smirking as they neared the finish line. But when they glanced back, they froze. She was still coming, step by step, faster, stronger. Her eyes burned with something they had never seen before. Not weakness, it's not fear, but fire. By the time they reached the last obstacle, a towering wall, she was right behind them. The recruits scrambled up, pulling themselves over, laughing in triumph. She reached the wall seconds later, her hands blistered, her body screaming. The crowd held its breath. Could she climb it? Would she fall? The answer came in silence. She dug her hands deep into the wood, pulled, pushed, every ounce of strength, every lesson, every whisper guiding her. And then she rose over the wall. The camp erupted in gasps. She had not only finished, she had caught up. The sergeant blew the whistle, signaling the end. Everyone turned toward her, the girl who once failed every test, the recruit they all mocked, the one they tried to break. She was still standing, and in that moment, even the commander's cold eyes softened. Just for a second, the field was silent. Recruits stood frozen, watching her chest rise and fall as she dropped to her knees, mud dripping from her uniform. The sergeant opened his mouth to speak, but then stopped, because the CIL commander was already walking forward. His boots struck the ground like thunder. Each step echoed through the training ground until he stood face to face with her. She lifted her head slowly, her eyes blazing, though her body trembled. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The commander's voice was calm, but carried like a storm. From the start, you failed every test. You fell, you stumbled, you drowned, you broke. Murmurs rippled through the recruits. His words cut deep, but then his tone shifted, low and steady, and yet every time you stood back up. That is strength no drill can measure. The crowd went silent again. He leaned closer. His words meant only for her. You wanted to prove yourself. You just did. Not to them, he gestured to the recruits around them. To yourself. Her chest tightened. Tears stung her eyes, but she held them back. The commander's gaze was sharp, unshakable. Then, for the first time, he gave her a single final command. Remember, this strength is not never falling. Strength is rising every time you do. His words struck her like lightning. She had carried the pain. She had faced the mockery. She had endured the sabotage, and still she had risen, not because of luck. Not because of help, but because she finally believed in herself. The sergeant finally broke the silence. His voice cracked with disbelief. Recruits, salute. One by one, the soldiers raised their hands. Even the two who had tried to break her obeyed, their faces pale with shock. For the first time since joining the camp, she wasn't the weakest. She wasn't the joke. She was the one they all respected. As the sun broke through the clouds, she stood tall, her uniform torn, her body aching, but her spirit unshakable. She had entered the camp as the girl who failed every test. Now, she stood as a soldier who had survived them all, and the SEAL commander's final whisper would echo. In her heart, forever. Rise, always rise.